This is Archaeodeath with Professor Howard Williams.
Hi, Professor Howard. How are you?
You get
I want to
my
play a
history
game
college
with you.
side. Okay.
I want to play a game with you. I call this fact or fiction. Other people have done this as true or false. And
Oh,
you can
gosh.
either choose, you can either choose to answer
Absolute.
it
Oh, no.
really, really quickly, or you can choose to like give me a longer answer, or you can choose to pass. You can say pass. I'm not answering
I don't
that.
want to cheat. I don't want to cheat by passing, and I'll try not
You
to
can-
cheat by doing a long-winded. It depends. I will give you. I'll give you absolutes.
Nothing you do is
cringe in
long-winded.
it.
It's wisdom. It's wisdom. Always use the word wisdom. It's never long-winded. I am gifting you with my wisdom. That's what you say to people. Okay, so the first one I'm going to skip because we already touched on that, and that's the Viking hair thing. So we're Vikings obsessed with hair hygiene. I'm going to go ahead and answer that and say fact.
Yeah, I think so. Fact. Yeah.
Roughly with okay. Vikings were often buried with their pets or service animals, and I don't mean like emotional support animal. I mean like horses or cows or goats.
Fact.
Fact. Oh, that's so cool. Okay. I like that a lot because I kind of picture that like the Vikings also had a connection to their pets like we kind of do. But again, that's just my
Sacrificed
fantastic
animals. Yes.
Yeah,
They loved them so much they killed them.
They loved them so much they killed them to have them in the afterlife. Well, how adorable. That's so romantic. Vikings invented a musical instrument.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe, but I don't know. I don't know which one that is relating to. I'll say false because there's nothing particularly. There's things that were already around long before the Vikings. I don't know if in the 8th to 11th century there's any new musical instruments that are new. No.
That's cool.
False.
That is very interesting because of how deeply I feel that like certain people, certain cultures have such a deep connection to music that often you find musical instruments scattered across their burial sites like everywhere, right? And so the fact that's really interesting. They weren't that interested.
Yeah, we do have evidence of.
So here's another one that we've kind of talked about a little bit, but I'll give it to you anyways. Viking mythology, very much like Greek mythology, was based on observations of nature. Fact or fiction?
There's a lot of fact. There's a lot of fact in that. There's a lot of our human world, from volcanic eruptions to sea ice to the mountains to fjords in the mythology. So yeah, I'd say of course fact has to be fact.
And like sounds of thunder, lightning, like did they even have, I know that these are recent not cultural, pardon me. These are recent like scientific phenomenons in my neck of the woods, but like we have things called frost booms here, which is like
I've been saying about those at some point.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like a flash freeze underground that it's terrifying. It actually it shakes your house. It feels like an earthquake and it sounds like a giant is kicking the outside of your house. That's what it sounds like. It literally sounds like you're going to go outside and half your house is going to be missing. It is so loud. And then, of course, we have lightning, winter lightning here in Canada as well. So here's another one. The Vikings visited the shores of what we call Newfoundland 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, fact.
That's so cool.
Archaeological evidence. Lancer Meadow. Yeah, we've got that.
We also, is that the one you're talking about in Newfoundland? Because I think they unearthed something in like the 60s in Newfoundland that the scientific community has been debating about for so long.
No debate. It's absolutely demonstrable archaeological site of Norse nature. There's no question.
Yay! So here's another odd question for you. Do we have any historical evidence of the Vikings visiting indigenous peoples here in Newfoundland?
From the archaeological record, there is. It's not so clear, but it's almost impossible they didn't. And from the later saga literature, they definitely did have interactions with what we would call native, indigenous communities. And
so how do we see that? Is that like in the burials, like we would see, oh, this person buried over here has a robe that's only made from over there, or like how would you determine that?
Well, we can't, and there's a couple. Well, there's a long story here that I'd have to check my notes on. There is now, I think, I hope I might be correct on this. I think we've got we've got DNA evidence, no, not modern DNA evidence of Native American phenotypes in Icelandic populations, suggesting, confirming the saga stories. I'm going to be in terrible trouble if I can remember this wrong. The saga stories that basically native peoples were abducted.
Oh,
We also have evidence of obviously items taken from the Americas in Greenland, in the
yeah.
Greenland colonies, and we also have evidence of there's been a speculation by one Scandinavian archaeologist that some of the methods of textile use may have been copied from Inuit in Greenland. So my point is, we're only touching the surface of complex long-term interactions with both ancestral Thule or Inuit groups to the very far north and ancestral Beothuk Indians and others in Newfoundland and further down the coast. And more archaeological evidence is going to come out. Someone's comments in my chat. I think 18 living descendants to First Nations. I don't fully understand the comments in the chat, but I think they're confirming that I'm on the right lines with those points. But I'm not sure.
That is so interesting.
There are at least evidence of interactions, both from the later sagas and hints from the archaeological record. But the scale and extent of that is very hazy.
Oh, so like that's probably where my the debate was how long was it going on for?
Yeah.
Where
may have been literally
all that,
only a few years worth of interactions.
Yeah. Wow. Well, especially if they were potentially negative.
Some people have really gone to town of extrapolating long-term harmonious relationships between Indigenous people and Norse people. And I think at the moment, we're in fantasy land, or that's an aspiration that hasn't been resolved by historical and archaeological evidence.
So that's where the story.
Nicest way to put it.
Yeah, that's like the story is coming to light. This could have been an oral story passed down through oral tradition in these families, so it can't be credited or discredited because we don't have the evidence to support it either way, kind of thing, is what you're saying? It's like, maybe.
I think we're in a situation where we've got, a limited. We've got to be careful about how far we push the evidence, is what I mean.
Yeah. Oh, that's fair. That's very fair. And I won't. I won't push the evidence. I promise I'll be good. I heard a story. This is part of like my fact or fiction, because I heard a story years and years and years ago on one of these like documentary little short things on the internet about the Vikings raiding Paris, and
twice
because right, but so the way it was presented to me was because the Vikings didn't really have a king or a government or a leader. They kind of were like in individual little clans or groups. That one group is that fair? Because like. Right? Because we always say ancient Greece, but there really was no ancient Greece. It was like places. So sort of same thing.
I mean, we all know there were no such things as people going around going, I am a Viking in the Viking age.
Yeah, exactly. Right? No, they didn't do that.
A range of kings, or what we'd call big tyrant bully boys, right? Basically gang leaders in a modern sense.
Chiefs?
Teaming up like six mafia bosses from Chicago in the 30s decide to go on a raid in their longboats or in their cars. Imagine sort of Elliot Ness Untouchables type analogy. It's that equivalent. We're going to go and have a raid. We're going to have a raid. So it's that equivalent. So they all team up and they go with a hit Paris once, and they go back a generation later in the late 9th century and hammer it another time. And they cause serious damage. That was the height of Viking aspirations, because Viking armies on that scale in the late 9th century were like mobile towns. They were basically just huge raves or festival sites, moving around by boat, setting up camp and kicking the crap out of anyone in the area. And they tried to siege cities. And that is the most audacious thing for the Vikings to do. Because at the end of the day, and this is going to knock people off, Viking raiders are cowards. What you're doing is you're going in, trying to catch people by surprise, nick their stuff, steal their women, and off you go to the boats, or their monks. And you're off to your boats with your treasure and your people that you want to take as slaves, and you're off again. You don't want to have a pitched battle unless you can help it. And so it's the most audacious, one of the most audacious moments of the Viking Age is when Scandinavians go all the way up the Seine and besiege Paris. And that is just a moment of just how gutted the Frankish realm is by the presence of the Scandinavians, that they are unable to mount a force to counter that threat. Not that they didn't have to worry.
No, they didn't have the word, but they had the money apparently.
Yeah.
Because like
Yeah,
that's
but
how
they
it was
couldn't
presented to
mobilize it
me.
in one place. Yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't. They didn't know what to do. But so actually, there's a question in my chat that sort of touched on what you just said. Is the whole stealing women thing true?
Yeah. Fact.
Uh,
Partly. Stealing probably other
mostly,
things as well.
maybe.
But yeah, stealing women. Stealing women, yeah.
So,
Slavery.
I mean,
Slavery. The Vikings were slavers in part.
yeah, they
in
were
large
slavers
part.
of other people.
Yeah.
But would they?
Yeah.
Would they? So if you were to be a woman stolen into a Viking camp, or I'm going to call it a camp for now, but like a village or something, what would your role be? Would your role be a servant role? Would you be a brooding mare? Would you be given a job? Could you later earn an income, or were you like in chains, walking around in rags, whatever?
We have no clue. What we'd imagine,
No
though,
clue.
is that women of a variety of different statuses and roles and would be, acquired, and men too, but would be acquired to be sold on. So you'd have to keep them in reasonably good nick if you're going to sell on.
Ah,
If you're going to be a slaver, you can't.
yeah,
This isn't like British slaving, which is, or transatlantic slaving, where you don't really care
yeah,
how many of them get to the other side. I think if you are
yeah.
trying to keep people alive, if you're investing in keeping people alive, slaving in the early medieval world is not the same kind of slaving that we think of, brutal and degrading and just as much, but the scale is smaller. But also, you're trying to keep these resources. You don't want to keep people just to look nice and just hang around. You need them to have skills. You need to keep people for function. So we imagine that they would have been then part of that group until they could be sold on, and they would need to be fed. They need to be treated well. They wouldn't be, why would you treat them otherwise? Why would you do otherwise? You're either going to kill them or you're going to keep them alive. I
Yeah.
don't see the point in doing anything. That's my default, but I don't think. Then, of course, slavery is such a loaded thing in terms of the parallels we make with later centuries. We've got to be very careful about characterizing Viking slaving in terms of later slaving. But I would say that at least women would have been there to be sold on, and therefore you'd need to treat them with some degree of care if you're going to bother.
I mean, that's
Cool.
fair. It's like, why would you bother to grab this object from somewhere else and put it in your boat, which is added weight and an extra mouth to feed potentially if you weren't going to, give it clothes maybe at some point and
from
feed
the later
it.
saga literature, we have clear evidence that a lot of Irish and Scottish women are ending up in Iceland. We've got DNA evidence to
Yes.
back that up, and that some of
Yes.
them would have been slaves, some of them would have been second wives, basically, but officially concubines, but would have been second, third, fourth wives for wealthy men. But some of them would have risen to positions of status. And we also have from the saga literature evidence of very powerful women from high status families of Irish and Scottish families making good in Iceland. So we can't simplify it. We've got to think about the women would have been able to not have freedom to negotiate. That sounds horribly modern, but there would have been different scenarios for those individuals, I think.
No, but that's fair. So like if you're a sort of tribal type Nordic person and everyone in the village has to sort of pitch in, otherwise you don't survive. It's interesting you say that like women of noble families, because in my opinion, women of noble families may have been a little bit more learned, a little bit more educated than, let's say, a common family or a peasant family. Maybe she might have been a little bit more of a harder worker. Her physique might have been different if she grew up on a farm. Yeah. But a noble woman from that time would have come maybe with like language, singing, right, art, dance, money management, right, politics. Maybe that would have been part of her learned thing. I mean,
so
exactly. Maybe that's
and
how.
There would have been important alliances forged, and that's one of the reasons why women are marrying into families in the 9th and early 10th century in northern and western Britain is alliances with local leaders and local clans. So we do have that dimension, but also these women would have been skilled, and some of them were clearly able. There's a comment in my question going, well, couldn't they just migrated themselves? Well, we do have evidence in the Icelandic sagas of at least one woman, Old the Deep-Minded, who basically organised her own expedition and took her whole family to Iceland. So she is basically saying, husband died. I can't remember the details. Husband died. Sod it. We're leaving Orkney, and she comes. There's a number of stops along the way in which she sells off various of her own daughters marries off to various other leaders in exchange. But basically, she negotiates her own passage to Iceland as a unit, when I say unit, I mean not just one or two kids. I'm talking about servants, slaves, family units, shiploads of people. She is moving with herself. So she did have agency, and so some of these women would have been able to negotiate their own journeys to around, not just to one place. Not we only hear about it from Iceland, but this must have been happening all over the show. So women were
Yeah.
moving too. And so we've gone away from the fact and fiction to a long waffle. But
Sorry, I'm guilty. See, wisdom just pours out.
Yeah, it's very careful. I've got to be a bit wishy-washy because I don't want to create too much of a single stereotype of women were just property sold on. You know, some women would have clearly had, from the historical sources and the archaeological sources, the power, money, influence, and intellect to adapt to these situations, quite horrible situations, and find ways of all of these Norse this is why we don't use the word Norse, and a lot of North Americans don't get this. We don't talk about Norse because Norse is only really used to talk about the language and to talk about particularly areas where there's no other. It's really as dodgy as the term Vikings, because Vikings at least embodies this idea of syncretism, which is nothing as much to do with Celtic speaking, Germanic speaking, Arabs, Slavs as it is North speakers. And that's the thing that's really important to remember, is that there's no such thing as a pure North society in the Viking Age. There are mixtures of people moving around, the slave trade, trading, you know, urban, proto-urban sites where people are from all over, from Sami, you know, Balt speakers, Ests, you know, from the eastern, Finns. All these different groups are interacting in these spaces. And so calling them Norse is as dodgy as calling them Viking, because it gives this idea of a single linguistic monoculture which never existed.
Yeah, but will we do the same thing here with, like I said, like the Greeks, right? Ancient Greece.
Exactly.
Ancient Greece wasn't a thing. They didn't walk around saying that you were Greek. You didn't walk around saying, "Oh, I'm from Greece." You know, it wasn't a thing. I'm not entirely sure how this happened. If it was like a simplifying of the map, maybe, and like the location of these people, or if it was like a miscommunication at some point that just spiraled out of control and hit the public, and we just ran with it for a long time. Because like, how did we get to Norse people, Viking people, or like even ancient Greece people? Like, how did that happen?
A lot of it is down to 19th and early 20th century models for European origins. We like simple stories of nation building.
Yeah.
You know, we like the idea that there was such a thing as a medieval French people, although there were medieval English people who call themselves English, which is another debate area where, you know, what is England and what is English when we're talking about the 10th century? And we seem to have a move by certain American academics to call everything in that period, the Viking Age, English, as if that gets us out of a problem. But you know, the term English is very rarely in limited use and rhetorically used from the 8th century through to the 11th century. I don't think many people would have gone around going, "I am an Englishman."
Yeah, you know, I'm an Englishman.
You'd go, you know, what the heck's he talking about? Where are you from? Where are your kin? Where are your locality? Who's your lord? Those are the kind of questions people care about, and those are the kind of ways you define yourself: your kin, your lordship, and your region, your locality. Not, you know, I am a Scot. Like, you look at the Last Kingdom or TV show, they got one person with an Irish accent, one guy from a Scottish accent, and you know, basically, and one kind of northerner, and then Uhtred, son of Uhtred, son of Uhtred, son of Uhtred, or whatever he's called. You know, with this strange comedy Danish accent. I'm a bit strange. I don't sound sometimes a bit Southern Asian, sometimes a bit Australian, and now I'm back in. And you're going, what are you trying to do, man? But you know, the idea is that this is there was a proto Scotland, there was a proto Ireland, there's a proto Wales, there's a proto England, and they're all just becoming what we want them to be. And that's the problem with the Vikings. We want the Vikings to become the Scandinavian nations and then migrate across to be settlers in the United States and Canada. And that's the nice origin myth. And it's never that simple, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, it's that, again, story, fact, and fiction.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question for fact and fiction. Because one more. Early medieval armor, okay, so like the area, the time period that you specialize in, and burial sites, was often adorned with religious symbols?
Often.
Often.
Yeah. Okay, let's go. Let's just say yes, even though, yeah, often not, but yeah, it does happen. We have religious symbols on lots of weapons, yes, as I've discussed in a few videos, yeah.
Yeah, because you and I were having a back and forth as to why. And for
so
someone...
weapons definitely had.
The weapons, right? Because like, as someone who, you know, I my religious background is I'm Catholic. And so I've studied a lot of our history and knowledge in the sense. Now, in our Catholic Bible, we mention people called judges. So you would probably be familiar with the story of like Samson and Delilah, right? Samson with his long hair that like Delilah cut off. He was a judge. So he was like a special soldier for God. And then also in the Bible, they also mention God's armor, that you are spiritually protected against the enemy when you adorn God's armor. And so I thought it was really interesting. You were showing us the hilt of the sword and how it had the four guardians of the gospel on it.
We have an even better one from that I can tell you about if you want.
Oh, tell me.
You know, it's an easy one for you to go and search up, right? It's easy. I can't remember the exact biblical quotation, but we have the biggest piece of 7th century hoard of weapon bits. It's called the Staffordshire Horde, and it was found by Terry Herbert, a metal detectorist, in 2011. So it's only 11 years. They've already published the final report. You can download the entire academic monograph, the Staffordshire Horde, an Anglo-Saxon treasure. You can download it. I'll put a link. I'll do a video about it at some point, and I'll show you things. But amongst all the weapons, right? It's mainly the hilts of swords and saxes. Saxes are short stabbing swords. They've got bits of at least one helmet, although there's debates about that. But there is one helmet, right? So this stuff was probably from a battle or battles where they're decommissioning and they're ready to melt down all the defeated enemies. There's different scenarios, right? But this is redundant war gear. But carefully wrapped into it all is at least there's two crosses. There's two crosses. And people say, oh, these are the holy objects. There's the war gear and the religious objects. No. The cross, the pectoral cross, and there's also a standing cross. These are not a different category of conceptualization. You would have needed a battle cross to take into battle. And this cross, and I wish I could remember off the top of my head, I don't have the kind of brain that can spin off scripture, but it has an Old Testament quotation on it, basically saying, yeah, your arm is going to be slain before your sight. You know, basically, it's an invocation of battle victory, basically, inscribed on this cross that is clearly a war. It's a weapon. It's not a weapon in the way we would conceptualize it, but
it's a spiritual weapon of protection.
Yeah. So you basically, in the mind of the Anglo-Saxons, of these 7th century people, whoever were these defeated warriors, whatever the circumstances in which this gear was collected, stripped off, they would have had to rip these hilts off swords. This is the enemy. They no longer want them, but they're amazing gold, garnets from Sri Lanka. You know, these are things that are coming into Northwest Europe. You know, they're the highest prestige objects. You're going to recycle them, but then for some reason they never get recycled. But amongst that, you have a cross. And that's the point. To anyone who's doubting, oh, well, it's just frills. They're just ornamenting weapons to look cool. No, they are in a mindset, both in the Christian and in the pre-Christian world, where art did shit. Art did stuff. You know, the difference between you being able to win a battle or not depends on your relationship to whatever gods you're worshipping. It doesn't depend on your skill alone. And you think, oh, well, they're just saying that. No. And you don't have to go back far in time. And as a Catholic, you will know this, that, you know,
it still happens today. It's still happening in my faith. Like, if people don't go, if someone's battling cancer, you know, we often present them with a rosary or the picture of the Madonna, which is who we call Mary, right? On a spiritual aspect, if it's difficult for a modern person who may have separated themselves for such things, but you have to, like you said, put yourself. Someone gave you sunglasses.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. That was great. Thank you, Anna. I got sunglasses. I don't know. I don't understand this app still. I'm still learning how to. But I got a gift of sunglasses.
It's a gift. Yeah, it's a gift. Give him something else. Someone give him a disco ball so we can see what that looks like. Or the aliens, because you talked about aliens and it was hilarious. Yeah, okay. Give him aliens or give him the disco ball. Come on, give him. So like people have. Oh, thank you for the roses, Nivea. People have marriages between their, their spiritual beliefs and their everyday beliefs. And those are not separated things. So it makes perfect sense to me that a warrior would go into battle with a cross. It might not make sense to people, like logically speaking, like why would you want this big heavy object hindering you? But they didn't see it as hindering themselves. They saw it as literally God's protection.
Well, can I give quick, if I have time, can I give you another quick example of this? Which
yes, please.
No
you have all the time in the world. All the time in the world.
Right, okay.
Take your time.
There's been an argument. The most famous early medieval objects that everybody can, if they don't know what it looks like, they can go and find it out by just a quick Google search. The Sutton Hoo helmet, right? This is a late 6th century Scandinavian helmet that ends up in a burial in the early 7th century in Suffolk, England. And there's a recent Netflix film, The Dig, about the discovery, the sort of fiction version of the discovery. But the Sutton Hoo helmet was reconstructed after the Second World War, and it is now the icon of British history because it's this face mask and it's got this wonderful eyebrows made that are boars, and it's got a nose piece which has a dragon's head facing upwards, a dragon coming down over the brow, and there's a third dragon at the back. And I've made the point in an article that no one's either agreed with or disagreed that what this is giving you basically eyes in the back of your head. It's like the moment, if you know the film The Usual Suspects, where
yes,
Kevin Spacey's going, well, how do you shoot the devil? What if you miss, Agent Coulion? What if you miss? And the idea is that if you're going into battle with this elaborate headgear, people say, oh, it's a ceremonial object, it's an early English crown. Bullshit. This object was to intimidate and to make you go into battle wearing this helmet. You're not only wearing a mask that makes you look like probably the god Wotan. That's the whole point. You're looking like an ancestral descendant of Woden. You're embodying the war god himself, right? You've got 2 dragons on your brow. You've got boars, bristling, boars. I mean, you don't want to face a boar in a hunt. A boar is going to gore you. You've got one on each eyebrow, but also you've got a dragon at the back of your head. And my argument is, whether they believed it or not, it's not about belief, but you're almost giving yourself, 360 vision, because these beasts are doing the job for you. In a modern Iron Man sense, you are basically gearing up with all of the tech to tell you that people are coming at you from every angle. And the point is, it's the Agent Coulion analogy is the point of they can see you, but can you rationally know that they are looking the other way, but there's eyes on you. How do you know they can't see you?
So I'm going to add something to this that maybe you haven't thought of before. And this is just coming from an outside perspective. I'm sure you've thought of it. I'm just being facetious. But we have Halloween, right? And what are the origins of Halloween? Well, the origins of Halloween were to dress your kid up like a goblin so that the goblins wouldn't take them, or something simplistic like that. So if you're going into war with someone, quite often a lot of these wars were like holy wars, or like there was a lot of clashes between other faiths and other religions and people of other. So anybody in the early, like a lot of Christians believe anyone else that doesn't believe what you believe is quite often in league with the devil, right? Or may have devils on their side. Yeah. So if you've got this helmet, a fantastical helmet, because in our Bible, right, the devil is quite often depicted as a dragon, a 7-headed serpent, to be specific. That comes from the book of Revelation. So, you're going into battle with a dragon on your head because the enemy's devils that could be spiritually attacking you and your men would recognize this as another being and like wouldn't mess with you, kind of thing.
I think that early Christians would have believed almost 99% of the same things as pagans did.
Yes.
And even if they didn't believe them in the same way, they believed in their efficacy to cause you harm.
Yes.
So you may believe in the one true God in your view, but maybe those other gods are devils and they can harm you. So my point is, it works against whatever beliefs the audience is coming at that battle scene with. It would also have been useful in other contexts wearing this gear. To intimidate people in legal assemblies, to assert your authority in the hall. This kind of bling, as we call it, crudely. But it was intended to be efficacious, almost animated objects that did things. And we talk about a lot in early medieval archaeology, objects that have not simply animated as in cartoon animated, but animated as in objects where the beasts being depicted are thought to actually do something.
So like
whether they were,
anthropomorphic, I
yeah,
think is the word.
yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
big
So
words.
you are basically the object has a personality. The sword has an agency of its own. It has a thought process to it. It's doing something that is almost of its own, and we see that in a lot of the later literature that the objects almost have agency of their own.
Well,
They
we
have a
talked
will
about
of their own.
names. Remember
Yeah,
we talked
and
about
we
them
talk about
naming
names
their
of yeah,
swords
yeah. So
and like
naming
giving them
swords
sort
is
of
part of it.
yeah, because
Yeah,
like mermaids do
yeah.
this with our tails. I'm going to tell you a little secret to the mermaid community.
I didn't know this.
We,
This is secret
we name our
knowledge.
tails. Yeah, when we have like, and again, it
Okay.
comes with adornment and status because the more expensive
Okay.
the tail, you give it a name.
Okay. This is all new to me.
Well, you're welcome. I'm sure you probably, I don't know how you lived up until this point without knowing that mermaids name their tails. I don't know how you did it. It's a
I don't think
miracle.
I have been. I don't think I have been living. I
You
think
haven't lived up
I'm
until
like
now. Well,
reborn.
there you go. You are blessed with mermaid knowledge. It is ridiculous. So I have a question from a viewer that I wanted to talk to you about Viking burial and wedding garments. Do we have historical evidence of these things? Do we know roughly what it looked like? Would they have looked similar?
No.
Do you know what I mean? No idea?
I mean, wedding.
Yeah,
No idea
wedding
what
and
Viking
burial.
weddings were like. We the TV show Vikings has a few weddings, and I think
Yeah.
I assume it's mashing together some later medieval Scandinavian folky traditions and just made up crap for TV. Yeah, I don't think we know what people got married and exchanged swords. I think there's some evidence of sword exchanging at weddings from later sources,
Cool.
but we don't have that kind of thing. We don't have the evidence for that kind of thing.
But that alone is fascinating. But what about burials? Because I know you specialize in burials.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, I think you said cremational burials.
Yeah, but I mean,
yeah.
What do you mean? How people were dressed in burials? You want to know?
Yeah, like would they adorn them for the afterlife? Would you be adorned in battle gear? Would you be adorned to be received at a banquet? Like, what did they look like? And again, I know like Viking people, but like the consensus, what would they do?
Well, we have some amazing preserved evidence of the textiles because the textiles have a mineral exchange with the bronze objects. So we actually have fragments of textiles preserved, and some burials, one from Iceland, where we've actually got the pigment preserved. And we know that one of the things that was said to me about 10 years ago, I talked to a Norwegian journalist, and she said to me, well, we in Norway know what Vikings were like, and we hate the TV show Vikings. And I went, okay, well, why do you hate it? And then she said some good reasons. And she also said, oh, the clothing's so ridiculously colourful. No one would have worn those colourful things. And no, all the archaeological evidence, all the pictorial evidence shows that people were wearing, the high status people would have been wearing strikingly vivid colours. And so when people say, oh, everyone wore just dirt brown, shit brown, no, people would have worn vivid purples, well, certainly reds and blues and yellows, and and they would have got dirty, of course, but they were trying to look striking. So, and we have archaeological evidence for at least some of those colour pigments in surviving textile analysis from Icelandic burials, Norwegian burials. So we know that people were dressed in death in their best, or given clothing as expensive gifts from kin for whether it's for the next world or whatever their vision of where they were going to go, they were dressed in clobber, proper clobber. We got evidence of silks going into graves. We've got evidence of, silks from China. We've got evidence of long distance trade. We've got evidence of high status textiles, furs. We've got evidence of eider duck feathers. We've got evidence of they're really packing this grave with provisions and clothing and bling, and in that I got a wizard's hat. Yeah, I saw it briefly. Dumbledore extreme. No, it's great. Thank you. So we've got all this evidence, and someone's adding in my comments about they've got evidence of the spinning fire, the dyeing, the weaving, the effort going into this process, and we do have this archaeological evidence of the importance of textiles and clothing.
But that kind of speaks a lot to their relationship with where they thought people were going, right? Because if you were these type of people, you wouldn't waste things on a dead body that you thought was just going to Earth, right? Like you wouldn't put high value things on someone that wasn't going to go anywhere.
There's a whole debate here about what I can't go into it. All I would say is they're not putting everything with the dead. And one massively important category of objects that they're not putting in the graves of the dead because they know it will be robbed immediately is silver and gold. And we know that there was lots of silver and gold circulating in the Viking world because we have hoards of it. we hardly ever find any silver and gold objects in graves, because you know what? They not only were they probably themselves robbing those graves within a few years. Honestly, we have evidence of Dr. Ali Klevnes's wonderful work looking at grave robbing. And these were people who actually probably the same family were robbing the graves to retrieve the swords, to retrieve the items they gave to Gad or whatever. Hey, I got a crown as well.
They made you a king. They made you a king.
I don't know if this means anything. Is there a hierarchy? Am I now a chief Viking? I don't know. This is good.
Yeah, he's the king of Vikings on TikTok. Declared.
My point is, thank you. But it's my point is, they're clearly choosing things not to go with the dead, and that is interesting. A lot of investment in burial, but clearly they're making choices about what not to put with the dead, which blows your mind, because we rely so much on burial evidence to tell us the stories. And clearly, not everything's going into these graves.
Well, but don't you think that that's interesting in the fact of, like, not so much that they didn't think the person needed it necessarily, but that they knew that there was a high potential culturally or family-wise, understanding that the grave could be disturbed. Yeah. Did they have, you know what I mean? Like a don't disturb him. You're going to make Dad angry.
This is the thing about graves, is that if you are doing something audacious, and this is true of modern people. I hear Ed Sheeran is just building a burial chamber in a church he's building on his estate in Suffolk. You know, the
I'm sorry, what? I know Ed Sheeran very well. He's building himself a chamber.
Own chapel with a burial chamber, right?
Okay.
So he's building.
Right.
Okay. My point is, if you're doing something like that, you have to be really wealthy, but you have to defend it, right? You're building like a 19th century, mill owner who builds this pompous great mansion and a church for his own. He lets a few of the poor people in for certain day services, but really it's his aggrandized. If you're doing that kind of thing, you've got to defend it. Basically, you've got to defend it. And if you're building a massive great barrow over a ship full of treasure, you've got to stay around and defend that. Yeah, and you defend it by authority, or you defend it by the stories associated with that person. We now have, I'll give you an example, we now have evidence that the great ship burials of Vestfold that perhaps fill all the books about the Vikings, Gokstad and Osebeya, seem to have been deliberately robbed 100 years or plus after they were buried as probably a deliberate strategy of desecration by the regime of the Danish king Harald Bluetooth. So basically his local lackeys are going to these awe-inspiring local tombs that everyone's worshipped, or not worshipped, but respected as the tombs revered of the local. Yeah, and they're basically hacking into them to rip out the objects of power and sending them to Denmark. Which is both the most vile and aggressive thing you can do. You can kill 100 people, but more offensive and memorable would be, I've got a spider. Suddenly a spider web just appeared. This is going crazy. I blame this Anna character. I know it's her.
Keep sending him stuff. Send him a spaceship. Come on, send him the alien. Come on.
But my point is, it looks like what we're having here is deliberate attempts to defame the previous regime. It's the same thing that happened to Saddam Hussein's statues. The same things we see with regime change in the modern world. But it's something, one thing and with Edward Colston's statue in Bristol as well, and various statues of Confederate generals in recent months as well. But it's one thing to just say, okay, we're going to move that out of the way. It's another thing to deliberately knock it off its pedestal, roll it down to the harbour, pose yourself with foot on its neck of the statue to reference the Black Lives Matter events, and then throw it into the harbour as a statue of a slave owner. Or slave trader, actually. And that is what the Vikings, the Danish regime seemed to have done in the 1070s to the ancient burial mounds of Vestfold, almost as an act of deliberate insult to the dead. Yeah. Until you see that. So when we talk about the Vikings having a view of their afterlife and respectful, and this is their, all somber, no, they all probably had very different ideas about the dead, very different. And like in ancient Egypt, where we think, the ancient Egyptians respected the dead. No, they were robbing each other's tombs left, right, and centre, because as soon as they're in there, they're potentially going to be robbed. So it's not that respect and honor is only afforded to those with the power and the prestige and the violence to maintain it. And as soon as that gets challenged, these things can be changed, which is why regime change and statue toppling, tomb raiding is often equated.
So, well, actually, that goes to but that goes to my next question to you is that I know that this is in your area of expertise, so I expect a very long, wise answer. Why a mound? Why a burial mound? We see that here in Canada, we get depictions of like Viking burial mound. They're always mounds. He's got a cat. See, you're cool. He's cool. It's official. But why a mound? And why were people buried in ships?
Okay. That's two questions, right? So first question, mounds are found across many different cultures, and they look the same now, but they would never have looked the same then. Mounds now are, grassed over, but we know from the way that when we excavate them, we find, I did a TikTok way back last year about this, that what looked similar were actually very different compositions, often built over many generations. And antiquarians, when they found a big mound, they said, oh, it must have been a chief, it must have been a king. But actually some of those mounds were built over generations and contain the dead of children, women, men, different people. And it depends on the society. So these things look like it's a classic example of pseudo-archaeologists going, oh, they must be all the same people because they build mounds. And this gets used in Europe, it gets used in the Americas, it gets used to sort of erase indigenous stories. This idea of the mound builders. Well, how could possibly anyone have thought of building a mound? And then the pyramids is a more specialized pseudo-archaeological niche of that. How could possibly anyone have thought of putting stones on top of each other in a kind of triangular shape in 3D? It's impossible for that to happen without intervention from extraterrestrials.
Oh, I love that. I love the debate of the extraterrestrials, but it's so fun.
I've got a book. But my point is, thank you for the book as well. But my point is, you get, they are varied, but I think the idea is that the mound creates a permanent marker. It creates a sealed landmark that defines place, defines memory, and defines connections between past and present. You can build that mound, you can make it bigger, you can add further mounds to it. And in many of the burial mounds we find from Viking Scandinavia, they are building mounds in lines and in groups, representing genealogy, representing families as they develop. And often they're reusing ancient Bronze Age mounds that were already 2,000 years old, or 1,500 years old, 2,000 years old, and using them as their focus of their cemetery. So they're aware of far ancienter, more ancient mounds that they're adding to. So my point is, why mounds? It's about power status, authority, claims to land, all series of different reasons, but it probably means very different things in different places.
Does it have
screams in Indigenous studies? What have I done wrong, Anna? Have I said something wrong? So my point is, screams in North American archaeologist. Okay, I think I've said something to offend my North Americans. But yeah, and someone said the Saxons reused mounds. Yes. So my point is that mounds aren't the same thing. Why ships? Yeah. Well, different cultures bury ships, and the usual default is to assume it's to do with, oh, you're going on a journey to the next world, and then the opposite. Some archaeologists react and say, oh, it's just a big coffin, it's just something blingy to put the dead in. I think it's probably a host of different reasons at different times. The ship would have been a powerful, prestigious object, an investment, a resource. Yeah. It could have articulated a metaphor of journeying. But it may not have been a metaphor of journeying in a literal sense of the spiritual ship is literally sort of sailing out. So it may have been, it may have been, some people may have buried the ship because they believe they're journeying down. Some people may have been burying in the ship because they believe they're journeying up to the sky. There needn't be a single reason. In the same way as they're killing horses in many parts of early medieval Europe and putting them in graves. It doesn't mean they all believe that they were riding on those horses to a Valhalla, type thing. Yeah. They may have had very different ideas of destinations, or it may have been just simply because the horse was a symbol of status, power, authority, and the animal may have been important in itself. So I'm wishy-washy on this. I think there's probably a lot of different reasons why you bury people in ships, and it's not all about journeying off to the next world.
Well, I think that distinguishes you as a true intellectual in the field to say, maybe this, maybe that, because like we were talking, there isn't a whole vast, map. These were the Vikings. They were, different groups with different languages and probably different cultural beliefs and understandings, because it would have had to have been something very important for these people to bury a whole ship, which I don't even know with their tools. How long would it take them to make a ship? There's another question. Months?
Well,
years?
It's a massive time. The sail alone is there's stats on the sail, how to create one, how to weave one sail.
Right, because you're weaving. You're actually like people. Sometimes modern people can't get the grip. You don't just go to Fabricland and buy canvas.
Yeah, no, exactly.
You have to make the canvas. Like some people don't understand.
One of the great resources that people are finding out more archaeological evidence of that really fueled the Viking Age shipbuilding is tar. We've got now evidence of massive amounts of tar exploit in inland Scandinavia. They are basically creating tar on a massive scale to line the ships, to waterclad the ships. And we now got evidence of this, a massive tar pit, not tar pits as in prehistoric tar pits, but I mean, they're actually burning the wood, creating the tar on a massive scale. And we've got this now mapped out. There's a brilliant new paper. So it sounds really mundane, but without the tar, you can't have the ships.
It wouldn't be waterproof.
Evidence of all of these areas that look like just, we think, no one was living there in the Viking Age because it's just forest and hill country. No, they were in that territory exploiting, doing extensive, not logging, because logging gives the impression of industrial logging, but, they are exploiting those woodlands, yeah?
Yeah.
They're not just
sustainable tree harvesting.
Yes, thank you. See, the problem is modern terms give you this idea of men in, thousands of men sort of hewing trees, but there's certainly areas, pockets of intensive exploitation, and then the tar and the wood is going to the coast for shipbuilding, and the whole of the Viking Age is reliant on that.
Well, the ship would not have been waterproof otherwise, right? You put wood into water. I mean, like, it's the whole story. It's the whole grade 6 science project. Are you going to sink or float? Well, you let me know when you put a bunch of trees together side by side and have at it. More power to you. Godspeed on your journey across the ocean. Bye-bye.
Yeah, exactly. And we do have one. I can't remember which saga does talk about a Viking chieftain or Norwegian chieftain who deliberately goes to sea in a crap boat, knowing he will never make it to his destination.
Was he trying to commit suicide?
Well, that's the idea. I mean, that's I might be some time in the Scott expedition. Who was the guy who went out of his tent and said, "I'm going for a walk. I might be some time." Meaning I'm going to just disappear into the. So have the that idea. The idea of yes, I am committing suicide by boat, death by boat.
Well, death by boat. For a mermaid, that's a very different meaning. We have to be very careful with boats. Okay. But so I had another question for you in regards to burial and like ships and things, because like we have this sort of romantic view of like this classic scene of the well-dressed noble Viking person in a boat off on a lake or in the ocean, and then the archer right on the shore with the fire on the arrow. Did this happen or did this not happen? Is this fact or fiction?
This is my official line, or I will be sacked from my job, is to say it's fiction.
Oh, is there like, okay, this is interesting. Ooh, okay, do tell. I touched a nerve. I like it. Okay.
It's like horned helmets. Like we've only got 2 helmets from the Viking Age, so we have to say that horned helmets are a myth, right? They're an invention of Wagnerian opera in the 19th century. So we have no evidence that Vikings wore horned helmets. In the same way, we have no conclusive evidence that people were set onto the water and then lit with a flaming arrow. This is from Kirk Douglas Einar's funeral, the 1958 film. That's where it's from.
Yep.
But we do have the source of the Edda Balder's funeral. The god Balder is put on a boat. His wife dies or is sacrificed, depending on the way you read it. Thor kicks a dwarf into the flames because the dwarf was annoying him, and we don't really understand why. Thor was a bit of a shit, I think is the point to small people.
No, really?
I mean, whatever your, the way you take that. And they had to, the gods say goodbye to Balder by setting fire to his boat on water.
Yeah.
And so my point would be, is that complete fiction, or is there actually, did people do this? And most of my colleagues would say that's ridiculous, Howard. Why would anyone? It's impractical. It's ridiculous. Why would you set a boat on water and try to set it alight? And I have this strong suspicion that while the archaeological evidence is difficult to prove, that I suspect some people were doing that kind of crazy stuff. Because
it's like not fact or
beyond the
fiction.
archaeological evidence,
possible. Like, well, how would you have, unless you literally went to one of these lakes and found a petrified Viking boat with evidence of being burnt at the bottom of the lake? That's the only other way that you would find it, right? But like, so we're going to say it's an act of fiction because we do not have historical evidence for it, and it seems to be incredibly impractical. But at the same time, the Viking peoples seem to be doing things that are also perceived as impractical in the ancient world, like burying incredibly expensive cloths, killing good horses, and burying ships.
Yeah, exactly. No, the idea is that people say, well, you can't burn a ship; it will just create a mess and sink in detritus. And I think, well, the idea is you'd have to. The problem is, from my knowledge of ancient cremating societies, they knew how to cremate stuff.
Yes.
They knew how to burn stuff properly, and they knew how to build a pyre carefully in a way that would burn slowly. And many TV shows, every zombie horror doesn't know how to burn a body, but the TV show Vikings actually does know how to burn a body. The pyres shown in the TV show Vikings are actually quite good. You know, I'd give them 7, 8 out of 10, or maybe 6, 7 out of 10. But, you know, my point is, and they do show this in the TV show Viking, and they assume it was a historical reality in the TV show and have Earl Haraldson burnt on a boat out on the fjord. But we don't have archaeological evidence for it, and you're right to say, where would we actually prove this? It's impossible to prove.
No.
But I have a feeling it's one of the many crazy things people did in the Viking Age, is bury people in the water. You know, either just push the boats out or burn the boats on water. And, you know, I can't prove it. I never will be able to prove it. But I think saying it's a myth is
a bit far. That's a bit too far, right? That's a little bit too far in the other direction. Like, okay, well, I'm going to present to you a couple things that I know, and maybe this might help you in a sense that, like, I am fascinated by what happens to bodies when people either drown in water, die in water, or decompose in water. I think it's incredibly interesting. So Viking people, based on observation and just living, would know that when you pass away and get into water, you get a bit boggy and you bloat up like a little balloon and float to the surface, and then eventually you explode. So, boom, big boom, like this, full of gross.
Squelch.
Exactly. But if you can get the body either burnt, right, and just have the non-organic ash float to the bottom, then you stay there as sedimentary settlement. And you wouldn't even be bothered by fish or crayfish because you're non-organic, right? They would never disturb you. You just become dust on the bottom. The other thing that you need to do is you need to weigh down the body, because it takes about 6 to 8 weeks for a body to completely disappear if you put it into any form of water. However,
a concrete overcoat.
Exactly, a concrete overcoat. Yeah, exactly, or a stone or a rock or a piece of steel or something. But
bury him in a concrete corn helmet. Yeah, I can see.
Well, you did say mobsters, right? You did say the mob, right? Put his feet in a friggin' cement block. Sink him, right? Sink his ass in the middle of the ocean. But the problem is that you guys are also located in an area of the world where your water is incredibly cold. And bodies in cold water, whether it be salt water or fresh water, typically calcify over and don't decompose fully. So, that being said, in my opinion, if you were to have a water burial, you would have to burn the person to non-organic ash and then just eventually let them float to the bottom.
I like the idea of this. I mean, I think there are. I think we don't know.
We don't know.
I would say that there's the Anglo-Saxon poem I mentioned before, Beowulf, has the funeral, the skilled chiefing at the beginning, who's the Danish king, who, like Moses, comes over the water as a foundling, like a baby, like a baby Grogu, comes to the Danes and rises to become the most powerful warlord, and then in death is sent back to the waves. He's pushed out on his boat, and that is what Tolkien took for Boromir. This is the idea of the romantic. It doesn't, but not burnt, but pushed out over the waves. It's very evocative. Every translation of Beowulf, it's the start of the story, because Beowulf is descended from Scyld-Scefing, so you have this genealogy. It's like a backstory, the funeral of Scyld-Scefing, because it sets up the illustrious power of not Beowulf's descended, Hrothgar's descended from Scyld, and that therefore Beowulf comes to help Hrothgar at his hall. But so I'm babbling on. But the point is that funeral, that scene, that idea is there in a Christian poem, clearly inspired by Moses, but was that also inspired by an idea that some people were pushing out boats? And people have said all sorts of hilariously detailed prosaic things like, well, the boat might not have, you have to get the tides right. Yes, you would have to get the tides right. And yes, you couldn't have done that on a rough seas, but were people doing this? And the other thing you've got to remember, and this is true of lots of ethnographies I've read about certain other parts of the world, is people didn't give a flying fart whether the village down the coast went, oh, here they come again, another dead body from those bastards up the, as long as it's out of sight, it's gone on his journey. He's farewell, my brother, off he goes. They go,
can you imagine? Oh my God, there go the Vikings again.
If you've ever seen the TV show, the comedy show Norseman, they do a massive parody of this whole Viking funeral on water scene. It's brilliant, where they can't get the arrow to fire right, and he just goes, well, it's very difficult with cold fingers. Have you ever tried firing an arrow with cold fingers? And the whole village go, yes, and it's just, but it's hilarious. But I won't ruin it any more than that. But
that just sounds like a Monty Python bit.
Yeah, and they have to send the guy out because, where did we leave the map of England? Oh, it's on the boat that we just set.
Oh no!
Could you go out and get it? So they play it out in hilarious fashion. But my point is that actually, as long as it's metaphorically gone on a journey, whether it just went around the next headland and someone else has to deal with the mess,
Yeah. I think that's hilarious, and that would be super funny because those cultures, based on their behaviors and based on what we know about them as historical fact, they wouldn't care if the other village had to deal with that. They're like, that's not us. It's not our problem.
And of course, we have many examples of cultures where the burden and responsibility of dealing with the dead goes to neighbours, goes to others, so that actually you have reciprocal relationships. There's a lot of sub-Saharan African ethnographies where you don't deal with the dead, your neighbours deal with your dead, and you deal with their dead. So actually, you can imagine many scenarios where those reciprocal relationships of alliance and friendship are about, well, we'll deal with the body, you do your funeral, we'll take it away. And you can imagine that's really anti-capitalist, very anti-modern. But you know what? That's what happens in a lot of societies, is that other people step in, do the work. So actually that can work geographically in these scenarios. So we're fantasizing here about things that we have no evidence.
I mean, again, part of storytelling, right? You take a little bit of something and you add a little bit of flair to it. That's fine. That's my area of expertise, is storytelling. But I also kind of find, you said it's anti-capitalist, but if you put a price tag on it, then it's very capitalist.
Well,
we'll take your dead for you for a price. Then we will move the body. That's another fee. Then we'll clean the body. That's another fee. Oh, you want makeup on him? Well, that's another fee. Oh, we're going to get you a $4,000 coffin that then you want cremated. No problem. We'll cremate your $4,000 coffin. What?
It's all outsourced now, isn't it? But in past times it was family members. One of my favourite archaeologists is also a prominent member of a particular Jewish community, and she is all her life, as well as excavated more human bodies than anybody I know, but she's also cared for more human bodies, dead bodies, than I've ever known, in terms of dealing with members of her community who have passed on. And so she's worked as a death dealer, both as an archaeologist, of respectfully and carefully, in a scientific and rigorous way, excavating ancient remains to tell their stories, and she has worked, actually hands-on, dealing with that community's dead bodies.
Is she like an archaeological mortician? Is she like a mortician?
Well, I mean, that's her private life mixed with her professional role. She sees people out and sees people and retrieves people back from the distant past. So I think archaeologists, people like to characterize this as somehow disconnected, but I think we deeply care about the stories of the people we're telling. And I think that's important. While we joke about it a bit, we do care. We want to make this, an appropriate thing. We think it's an important part of our role. And it involves dealing with different cultures. And that's often seen in a negative way. But I think if we don't deal with different cultures, different perspectives, we only see our own narrow.
And how boring would that be?
Exactly.
I think we need a little bit of spice in our life. This is why a very educated, intelligent archaeologist from Wales decided to go on a Mermaid live with some crazy landlocked fish from Ontario, Canada.
I'm just looking for all the lovely comments I'm getting here. So it's really nice to see so many friendly faces from TikTok chipping in. I want to thank them all because it's lovely to see this.
Well, you've entertained my mermaids immensely. I actually have a very dear friend of mine. She's on here. Her name is Mermaid Nymphia, and she has like this really complex story involving her character Mermaid Nymphia and Prince Thor, and like a Viking kind of esque story. So like when I told her that I was meeting with you, she was like, "Oh my god!" So like she's a super big fan.
I wish I'd done some proper research on if there were Viking mermaids because I really don't know.
Oh look, you're a king again! Da, 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 da. I'm telling you, send him the aliens. Send him the aliens. They're funny. And actually, okay. So we can't end this without talking about aliens. We have to talk about aliens because.
Okay, what do you want to know about them? Because obviously I talk to them all the time.
Clearly, I mean, you talk to them. I am one. I mean, so my favorite thing is I sort of love these people. Like I love the UFO hunting people, the Bigfoot people. I love them. The flat earthers, they're so fun. Okay, they're so fun. You're like, yeah, like I love ghost hunting people. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, put me on chic. Like I want to see like, oh my God, did you hear that? Like I just love it so much.
You got to do the camera move. You got to
do the camera check. Oh my God, what was that? And you're just like, yeah, what was that? And you're like shaking in the woods. I love it. I love it. I eat that stuff up. I think it's so much fun. Why do people always think that if there's something they can't explain in antiquity that aliens did it?
I mean, in terms of the modern... Well, I mean, I react. I don't usually say this so boldly because other people do say it. But I'm afraid, in terms of the modern craze for aliens, I'm afraid it does come down to Eric von Daniken, who was a screaming racist and a horrible faker and a complete charlatan, and that his book, The Challenge to the Gods, took off as it captured this beautiful in a dangerous way relationship of our space age fascination, the craze of the 60s and 70s for space exploration, right? It touched onto that, and I mean, this is the way I understand it anyway. I'm sure people can correct me. Touches on that, and it touched it on our cravings to explain global stories, the big who we are, and by pitching aliens as progenitors, it also simultaneously pitched into a wonderful horror fascination we've had since the end of the 19th century science fiction genre and horror genres, H.P. Lovecraft. The idea that there were aliens who were here already. They were here in the ancient past. They were mapping the fate of mankind. Yeah. And it fitted into a secularization movement. You know, post-Second World War, traditional faiths are on the decline. This fills a religious niche. And it is religious. So I have to say, and this is very crude characterization, no disrespect to people who are really keen on this, but I would say Ancient Aliens is a bit of racism, a bit of charlatanism, a bit of craving for spirituality with the decline of traditional religions, and a lovely, neat, catch-all narrative that explains everything. And you don't need facts, you don't need to read, you don't need to study, you can just explain it all because aliens were there. And so it serves a God. You can't be bothered to say even it was God did it. It's even lazier than that. You just cook up the aliens, fit them in somewhere, and that's why 30 years later, TV shows...
We're still talking about it. We're literally still talking about the same thing.
And what shocks me is that these things are so tenacious. Like, I mean, it's only one kind of crazy archaeology, and and this is the thing that I find, and this is where I do depart. That's the standard line, but I'm very critical of this line of thinking, not because it's wrong and I just get snooty about it because it doesn't fit my evidence, but I get very angry about it because it really disempowers and disparages Indigenous communities, but it works to disparage everyone. It insults us all. It insults all of our human creativity, and it feeds into this narrative that only we in the late 20th, early 21st century are special because we've risen above the primitives. and everybody who was struggling to understand their existence, and now we understand it all. So it's arrogant, conceited, Western, white, male stuff, right?
Yeah.
But then there's another thing, and this is where I am sympathetic with ancient alien lovers, and this is a narrow way I am, and this is I can see my archaeology friends are going to burn me at the stake for this. I have a brother, an older brother, who was an astrophysicist as a degree level, and he became a computer scientist and did boring computer programming stuff. But he started off being passionate about extraterrestrial sci-fi stuff.
Yeah.
And the problem is, many of these people who love ancient aliens would love the real stories of human creativity and human development.
It's so much cooler.
But they're fed this stuff. And there's a real advantage, because if you talk to some physicists and sci-fi people, the thing that gets people into sci-fi is Star Trek, Star Wars. They're not snooty about it. This is the way in. And then they explain then that TIE fighters could never move the way they do. And, the planes, the aircraft in the Dune new film could never have flown, and you can then get them on a journey that's fun rather than just dismissing everything as wrong. You can say, well, this is a really interesting way in. So I'm going to do a series about the Archaeology and the Mandalorian series soon.
How fun! Oh my gosh!
There's a real rich way we can engage with this without saying we validate these crazy ideas. But if people love the idea of these fictional worlds, we can capture that just in the same way as the people who love Tolkien, the same way that people love Game of Thrones. It's not real, it never happened, but it still captures the imagination for pasts and different stories of different civilizations. And that's where I think we've got to be careful to balance the criticism of this with positive, okay, none of this actually happened, but what if, and how can that lead us into stories about what really happened in the Americas in the 14th century CE, because there's some cool shit going on, And so I feel, as an archaeologist, I'm sorry I'm waffling on, but I want to make the point that I don't want to just sit here constantly going, no, that's wrong, the aliens didn't exist, because yes, there's so much more exciting things to say about the human past, and just shouting at people that they're wrong doesn't get us anywhere. And that's why I think we need to think much more clever. And astrophysicists have done this really well. Science people have done this really well. Go with the fiction, don't validate it, but leverage it. Leverage it to our stories, And that's what I would say to ruin your
Howard,
life.
you're talking to a mermaid.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to go with this is, whether or not one happens to believe mermaids existed or not, it's the storytelling that captures the imagination and gets people interested in real issues about environment, marine life, ecology, whatever you want it to be about,
My aspect is free diving and like extreme depth diving and breath hold, and I use that for physical and mental health. So that's how I got into this, was free diving at first.
Yes. Yeah.
But I really do think that this is just an amazing thing, because there are creators on this app that you've mentioned in other videos, how their narratives can be so damaging and can last for so long because they sprinkle in a little bit of fact that makes them a little bit may seem credible, and then they just go off on this unbelievable tirade of just nonsense. But because they have that, they're using big words, or they're using I made a video about this a while ago where I said, please be careful of the people that you're following on this app and the fact that they go, oh yeah, my name is so-and-so and I'm a historian. I'm like, okay, so how are you a historian? Oh, you just decided that because you've read books.
Well, this is the thing that I must say that I've have struggled with this app, and it's true of all digital sources, is that I don't want to have to spout. The video you quoted me to promote this was the one where I lost it, and I did do a little rant about my qualifications because.
But we love it.
That, it's cringeworthy and arrogant, and I don't.
No, it's not.
Equally, well, my point is, there are people out there who don't have degrees, who know their shit, and are telling responsible stories. And the way I see it, the way I tested a few of the big creators in doing little responses. And it's interesting how some of them respond. Some of them ignore me. Most of them have ignored me when I've done little qualifier videos. Or that's interesting, even though it's totally wrong. and some of them have engaged and said, yeah. And some of them have gone, it's interesting you say that because I was just going to correct myself. And those kind of things. It's really funny. But it shows the level of integrity behind
Yes.
those individuals and whether they are willing to take criticism. Because I'll tell you something, if any of the people on that relatively viral video that I did wanted to take me to task with evidence, there were holes. There were so many holes in what I said. Not holes because I was wrong, but holes, the angles people could have legitimately started a constructive conversation about Viking colonization, and I would have taken it because there are debates about the term, its use, its application, and all they could, the trolls wanted to say, no, everyone's colonized all the time, native creators can't get it right, you're just defending somebody, racism, meaning they're probably racist and they just want to project.
Yep.
And then there were people who generally didn't know. And some people just didn't get what I was saying because it was more than 2 seconds long. But in the mix, if someone had said to me, and a few did, what are you actually saying? I tried to explain what I was saying. And if they didn't agree with it, that's fine. If they wanted to take it further. And I'm not going to stand on a pedestal and say, you can't criticize me. But some of these creators, you can tell that they're pushing it with their levels of knowledge because they won't concede. They'll always just... No, I said it. It's fact. I read it on Wikipedia.
Yeah, I read it on Wikipedia. This is what happened,
or whatever it is. And you think, really, man? You've said something that was really wrong. I could have hammered you on it. I said it politely, and I did. I've done this with a few creators, and I've been really disappointed by their response that they couldn't take it. They couldn't take They didn't have to have time to debate with me, but they couldn't say, okay, that's a different perspective. I know where you're coming from there. It showed that they really didn't know what they were doing.
But that's the art of listening, right? Because the art of listening is, if you're truly listening to someone else, then you have the ability to say, your perspective is really interesting. I would love to know how you came to your conclusions, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. But also I'm one of them. I have no problem with people presenting fun, historical little things or biology. I just want everyone to understand who they're following and to be aware of what we call the social media credentials, right? Because I don't claim to be a wildlife biologist. I don't claim to even be a marine biologist. I'm an early childhood educator, and I specialize in taking information that I hear and presenting it to children. That's literally what I do. But other than that, I don't claim any other credentials just because I've read a book. So I want people to be very aware of who they're following, and entertainment is for entertainment, right? Like what I do is I'm an entertainer. That's what I do. I might sprinkle in some fun little ocean fact videos. And by the way, that's actually something that I wanted to talk to you about is if you ever come across these trolls and like you just can't be bothered, I've decided that trolls get responses from me of ocean facts. That's what I give them. I don't engage.
That's a really good example. I've been doing voiceover of John Bercow, the former Speaker of the House of Commons.
Yes, I find that hilarious. I love it so much. British politics. More British politics.
I've got 7 more Bercow audios to deploy. And I don't know how quickly I'll use them up. And then I'll move on to something else. But yeah, giving them a fact back. But most of the time I'm deleting it. I mean, I got 1 or 2 just abusive comments, quite a few abusive comments, and I just delete those. And if it's peddling something that giving oxygen, I will just delete it. But some of them are just, I feel I need to show people I'm not taking this because it's important that people know that I have robusticity. I'm not indulging. Someone just said I'm too nice here, and I probably am too nice.
He is too nice. I completely agree. He is way too nice.
But then the challenge we all have, and I don't get it right all the time. I have just done. There was a big controversy in UK archaeology when a US Californian filmmaker tried to peddle a new TV show that's going nowhere fast. It'll never get funding. He did some. He set up a website, set up a Twitter account, and started blocking everyone who was an Irish, Scottish Gaelic historian, linguist, as a strategy to gain notoriety. And it was a deeply dodgy, racist set of he was trying to peddle a TV show called Celtics. And I made the decision, this was not worth my time. If I gave it criticism, it would feed it. And I made the decision not to comment. Other archaeologists said, this is ridiculous, outrageous. We've got to counter it. It's going to be actually made. And I went, no, this is never going to be made. It's so bollocks. And I think I made the right judgment on that call. But I would say, and I'll say this, whether they're watching or not, I made the wrong call with Mumlennial in just doing a few videos and not being robust enough, because I thought this would go away. And some of my other historian and archaeology creators, I think, went too far the other extreme and made every bit of their content about countering her.
Yeah.
But I thought it was, and I think I pitched it wrong in doing too little. But my point is, we're always playing this game of when do we pick our battles? When do we? Where are the hills we'll die on? Oh, I hate that metaphor, but where
the mound. Where's the Viking mound where we are going to be buried?
Yeah. What is the point? Do I care enough that somebody on the internet is saying that flowers that are yellow are red? Does that really bother me? And that flowers that are blue are green? And do I care? Or does it suddenly come within my remit of specialism where I have to make a point and say, actually, I know about this, and I can tell you they're wrong,
Yeah.
And that's the challenge we all face. And someone on here is an archaeologist who's got a great account, Jen, saying that she was way off doing a thesis when the Rome fake stuff was on. And that's another reason we're all busy, and we can't always find, and the same with other fake, news. And I may be responsible for ballsing up occasionally. And I'm happy for people to say, Howard, you really missed the point here, and I'm happy with that. But at the end of the day, we're all trying our best. But then some people are not trying at all. They're trying to just spread misinformation, and that's difficult to know when to call it, isn't it?
No, I completely agree with you, and I completely understand. And like your area of expertise is in a really much different position than like mine. But we also have the mermaids have their drama too, Like
so
we
tell
have
me one mermaid drama. Come on, it's all been about me. You tell me.
We have people on this app that purposely post very dangerous underwater stunts or themselves getting injured for clout. And they will post this video over and over and over again, and it gets millions of hits. And there are children on this app. Obviously, as a fantastical creature or a cosplayer, there are children that come onto your channel. And if you claim to be a professional with no credentials, no diving experience, no certification, I got a problem with you. And I've said this too many times. I do not like people teaching swimming lessons or mermaid lessons to children without credentials or insurance. And I will tell you that. And I have no shame in telling you that. And I also make like parent beware videos. Do not hire mermaids to come onto your property and entertain children if they have no insurance, if they have no credentials or references. Right, or background check, a basic background check. Like, who are you bringing onto your property to interact with children? So like that's my big passion on this app is I'm like, people call me like the mermaid police because I'm always like telling people I'm like, nope, don't do that. Nope, you can't do that. Stop posting videos of you banging your head underwater. Stop it now.
There are things that are general physical danger to people is something I never had to thankfully deal with, or I haven't really felt I've needed to wade in on because, at the end of the day, even if I see people looting an archaeological site or saying some crap about ancient aliens, it is harmful down the line. It can be harmful to Indigenous people. It can be harmful to women in some way. There's always an knock-on effect. I'm not saying it's harmless. It's harmful, but it's not immediate risk of physical.
Yeah, we have an immediate, like if you F around underwater, the consequence is death.
Yeah.
So, I have a very strong passion about this. I am a PADI certified diver, free diver, mermaid diver, and mermaid instructor. And so I just don't appreciate it when people are going around in their little mermaid costumes, banging their head underwater and then getting millions of views. And I'm like,
yes, I suppose the equivalent would be if we suddenly advocated going out and trying to hunt a blue whale in a 2-foot boat with a harpoon. Not only would it be
to be historically accurate to what the Vikings did. Yeah,
most likely you're going to die in a horribly wet way.
Yes, yes, you're going to die, and the whale is going to be none the wiser. You'll just die, and the animal will be like, "Ow, something pricked me," and then move on with its life. People. But I completely understand the creators in your field that have caused such uproar. And again, it's because they're able to sprinkle in just a little bit of something that maybe, oh yeah, they got that right. And then all of a sudden, blah, 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 blah. And you're like,
yeah. But also, don't you find that the level of confidence people exude on this app is quite dangerous? Because, we all try to be confident in our videos and try to be give simple, we have to condense everything down. The tweets, Facebook posts, TikTok, but it does exude this level of, belief that and that's where I struggle myself, because I feel myself saying things and I go, I know that's not, it's more, there's about 15 qualifiers to get to that point. And yet, but some folks can just do it, just go, this is the way it is. Thank you.
Well, so that's the great debate with like I'm going to take something that's incredibly controversial here in North America. I don't know how it is in your neck of the woods, but the great vaccine debate, right? And it's because scientists and doctors do not give absolute yes or no answers. They give probable answers because that's what an intellectual does, right? Oh, we have the probability of this happening, but 98% sure. Whereas people that are just full of themselves can go, Bill Gates is trying to read your mind. Like, it's like, what are you talking about? So I think that is where the great divide is in regards to how intellectuals or learned people speak. They don't speak in absolutes, which is another thing from Star Wars. You know who speaks in absolutes? Siths.
Yeah, exactly.
A Sith will speak in absolutes, and scientists and doctors and learned people do not, because another finding can come along down the road and tear up your entire history book.
This is true, and it's incredibly, and it's about trying to balance when you show when I say, I mean, I've done this on archaeological digs before, and I've done it with students, who I have admitted to students on archaeological excavations that I'm not an experienced field archaeologist, and they've literally taken that as, I don't know what the heck I'm doing.
Yeah,
and I meant it in a humble way of, I meant it, and I realized I was talking to students who didn't know how to take that from an experienced field. What I meant was, like some commercial archaeologists spend literally 45 weeks of the year in the field. They've done it for 20 years. I am not that guy, that girl, right? My expertise is academic, it's teaching. That doesn't mean I don't know how to do field archaeology. It just means that is not my forte, right? In the same way as I say, I can't play the piano, but if I could say I can play the piano to grade 8 but I'm not going to go in front of a concert audience and try and do good old Beethoven or something. It means that
exactly.
But people have taken that wrong. And when I've admitted limitations, people see that as a weakness in both academic and other contexts. They see it as they literally take you in your word and go, oh, he's a fool, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And so it's a difficult balancing act, because you can introduce doubt where no doubt is required by being humble, and you can actually, overplay it in other regards. So it's a game, isn't it? You've got to constantly sort of check yourself and check others and make sure that you're being honest to yourself in how we're communicating. And I'm happy to retract things.
No, I just see that as a sign as an intellectual, because even if you're have a doctoral degree, if you have the ability to admit and say, there are people in this field that know more than me, that means that you have a mind that is open to continuing learning, which is the best person to learn from.
Yeah.
But again, like all this like fake macho nonsense of I'm the greatest and I know everything in the world and you guys should follow me. It's all pretend. That's all fake. And then you see them like crying in the corner as their life is falling apart. So it's like, whatever. Oh my God. And if your students give you trouble, guess what? You have an ally in Ontario, Canada now. Just send them my way and I'll deal with them. I deal with children all the time, Howard. I deal with children all the time.
They're great at the moment. I was thinking about long ago in the distant past, but it's just trying to use it as an analogy to think about, how we perhaps sometimes, underplay ourselves and overplay our expertise in different ways.
No, that's fine. That just comes with self-confidence in your knowledge. Howard, you have been such a cool guest. And thank you so much for coming to talk to me for over 2 hours. Over 2 hours
and
putting up.
How did that happen? Yeah. We promised we wouldn't talk for 2 hours, and we had this discussion, and look what's happened in a good way. Yeah. Thank you. It's been fantastic.
See, and also putting up with my absolute nonsense.
No, it's not nonsense. You're being very clear. It's very good. Really good stuff.
Oh, thank you. Well, I hope I know that I'm not an intellectual in the field, but like I hope that like I stimulated you with some questions
No,
at
I've
least
really
because
enjoyed it, and it's made me think about how to explain things and things I haven't really thought of before. And I've learned things about whales and mermaids, and now I know. Now I know. At least I know. I've broken the surface, to use another metaphor. I know a few mermaid facts I never knew before. It's a
no,
whole
we
new
had to
thing,
come
and
to you, you know, because I don't think you're an expert in freediving. You wouldn't be able to get to my level. I had to come to you.
no, I
But
wouldn't have. I would have been literally floating off down the fjord.
yeah, floating out. They
You
were
know,
like, "Oh, great! Here comes
on
another
fire.
dead body."
Yeah, exactly.
Howard.
That would have been me.
Howard in a boat. But I do think that number one, we need to see like I want to see like an alien face mask from you at some point because that would be hilarious. I want to see helmets. I want to see swords. I want to see more like cosplay fun interactions from your channel because I think that that's fun. It's fun.
I'll try. I'll keep going with it. That's all I can say. I'll keep going
Yay!
with it.
And I'm sure your
And,
archaeological, like your colleagues in the chat are probably hating me right now because they're probably like, no, none of that, no.
I liked your. I mean, really inspired me to do that video on mermaid archaeology because I think that is a. I mean, it seems frivolous, but actually, it's a genuine issue of how we deal with stories, landscape. Yeah, anyway, I really enjoyed that, and thank you for inspiring me with that, and the sword one as well. So keep those questions coming. And but I mean, it's up and down my feelings about this app because you feel these moments of I'm making some lovely people, and then you think, But you know how it is. But I'll keep going.
I do. But that's okay. If ever you're feeling down, just come on back to Mermaid TikTok because we're always magical all the time.
Thank you so much for your time and for all the wonderful questions. And we'll chat further, I'm sure.
Good night, Howard. Bye. And go to bed. I know it's like 1 a.m. there.
Is it? Yes, it's past midnight. Yes.
Oh my God. All right.
I've got some more glass claw beaker wine to finish, but
Nice. And then have a good pass out. Yeah.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you everyone for the questions.
For relaxing times, make it Archaeodeath time.